There has never been any such thing as a Palestinian nation state. There's
it's
no
incredible
right
that
to
you think
elect
that that's
Hamas.
a legitimate dispute.
You know, I allowed you to spew your ridiculous
the entire world
propaganda,
on one hand,
but perhaps you can allow me to finish. Sure not.
and the U.S. enabling Israel to violate international law is the dispute that you're saying.
Much as the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza are not capable of electing a legitimate government. So, all right.
Thank you for that racist dig. I appreciate it. But no, let's just be clear.
Racist.
What the U.S. is saying is that Israel is above the law. And if you think that that makes it a legitimate dispute about what the law is, that's an absurd position.
When did I ever say
you're welcome
Israel
to take
is above
it.
the law? When did I ever suggest that?
In today's video, Omar Badar and Scott Horton absolutely destroy Piers Morgan and Michael Knowles in a heated debate on Gaza. Now, Piers Morgan and Michael Knowles, as expected, are doing their usual mental gymnastics to justify this insanity, but Omar Badar and Scott Horton are here to shut it down with cold, hard facts. We're talking about decades of occupation, war crimes, and a brutal blockade. And now MAGA thinks they can just sweep in and turn Gaza into their personal playground? It's beyond absurd. So let's dive in and watch how these progressives shut down Piers Morgan and Michael Knowles in this heated debate.
You're trying to stop me from speaking.
You're suggesting that there is no unanimity. You're suggesting that there's a legitimate dispute, and I'm telling you that the dispute is the United States is saying Israel is above the law. That's the dispute. The entire world thinks that international law means something, and you can't take other people's land, and the U.S. says no, Israel gets to do it.
Let me bring in Vinny. He's been waiting patiently, unusually patiently, Vinny. I've got to say, you've been on exemplary behaviour today. I salute you. Let me just ask you a slightly different way into this, because I find your conflict over this fascinating. I think a lot of people on the right are going to be conflicted by this, because apart from anything else, how does all this sit if you take Trump's dream proposal to its logical conclusion and American troops are on the ground all over Gaza protecting this new Riviera and all the Palestinians are gone, and this is all happening thousands of miles from America. How does that sit with America first? I mean, is there not a direct conflict there with that whole ideology?
Yeah, Piers, and that's why I said from the beginning it's conflicted on two sides. I mean, you know, Piers, you know me as a United States Air Force veteran. I am anti-war. The reason I left the military was because of the actions of the United States after 9/11, this weapons of mass destruction, this BS war that we were pushed into. Which, if you don't forget, Bibi Netanyahu did go in front of Congress and say also that Saddam Hussein not only had weapons of mass destruction, but that killing him, taking him out, would cause positive reverberations throughout the entire region. It did anything but that. But Piers, you know me, I'm anti-war, but at this situation, what else do we do? Okay? There's one side, just like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles told this, Ben Shapiro has said, you know, Israel could take care of itself. All right? Obviously, it can't. It's a horrible situation that's not going to get better. And I wanted to ask Omar, who's running, if the Palestinian, is Hamas in charge? Who's actually in charge? And what solutions do you have to taking out Hamas running the show? Because if they're in charge, nobody's going to stop, Omar. Nobody's going to stop. They're not going to stop.
Yeah.
This was just another classic case of bad faith arguments from the right trying to justify Israel's actions while completely ignoring the reality on the ground. Omar Badar lays out the facts. Israel has been violating international law for decades. The US shields them from accountability, and the occupation has made any real Palestinian governance nearly impossible. And then there's this absurd idea of turning Gaza into some MAGA-backed luxury resort, which is so out of touch with reality it's almost laughable. The US already bankrolls Israel's military occupation, and now they are supposed to send troops to protect Trump's fantasy beachfront property? That's America first? Give me a break.
And I'm not, like I said, Piers, I'm anti... Go ahead.
Yeah,
the obvious answer is you should ask how Hamas came to power. There was a two-state solution on the table back in the late 1990s towards 2000, with the idea that Israel was going to end the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza to allow the facilitation of a Palestinian state. And there was no support for Hamas at the time. They were trying to sabotage that deal. but only when Israel made clear that they have no interest in allowing a legitimate Palestinian state to exist, kept entrenching the occupation and insisting that Palestinians must live forever under the boot of Israeli occupation, that's when support for Hamas rose and Hamas became a political force to contend with. So if you have a problem with Hamas being empowered, the obvious alternative is to create a peaceful path where Palestinians can be a free people. And as long as American policy is to enable Israel denying Palestinians freedom, that is precisely what empowers groups like Hamas and makes it impossible that we're going to get rid of groups that are advocating for violence as a means of achieving liberation.
Okay, let me ask.
When Israel has blocked every other avenue for freedom.
Scott Horton, you know, the obvious response I have to what Trump has said is, okay, if you find that idea completely objectionable and outrageous and shocking and it can't possibly happen, then what's a better one? I mean, in your eyes, what is the best way that is achievable to move out of this war into genuine potential for peace? I think it's going to take years, whatever way you take, given all the history here and given the events of the last 15 months. But what is the more credible, achievable pathway if it's not the way Trump's suggesting?
Well, you're right that it's been a horrific setback for peace, you know, going forward, just of what's happened since, you know, including and since October the 7th. It's a real catastrophe, but there are places around the planet where people have some or another form of binational type of state where they have their own local security forces under one government. And there are places where you have extremely bad blood historically, but where it's basically worked out. For example, there are millions of ethnic Germans that still live inside France, but they're free. And so there's nothing to fight about. And but of course, Germany and France have fought over the millennia, right? If you want bad blood, you can have some. There's also essentially a status quo holding in Bosnia where there's tons of bad blood between the Bosnian Serbs, Croats, and Muslims. And they went through horrific fighting for years, but then they stopped. And they could get up in the morning and get revenge for their brother that died in the thing, or they can get up and go to work. And so if the dynamics are changed severely enough, then things can go back to hell. But it goes to show that people can put the past aside.
Scott Horton lays out the facts here. Hamas didn't just rise to power out of nowhere. It was a direct result of Israel blocking every peaceful path for Palestinian self-determination. When people are trapped under occupation with no way out, resistance, violent or not, is inevitable. And Horton makes a solid point here. Peace is possible when people have equal rights and control over their own lives. Look at history. Germany and France were bitter enemies for centuries, but today they coexist because they've moved past occupation and domination. Israel and Palestine could do the same, but that would require Israel to stop treating Palestinians like second-class citizens and actually allow a real state to exist.
We had it in we had it close to where I am. We had it in Northern Ireland, of course. You know, where for many decades it seemed completely intractable. You had two groups led by paramilitaries, terrorists, whatever you want to call all of them. But they were, you know, terrible actions on both sides throughout the troubles in Northern Ireland. But eventually, clear-headed new leadership, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, George Mitchell, others all came together, and they managed to get to a place of peace. And actually, Northern Ireland now is a pretty peaceful place. We don't get these daily updates of appalling attacks and so on from both sides.
Can I add one thing there, Piers?
Yeah.
You know, ever since the founding of Israel, 1/5 of the population of citizens of Israel, although they're sort of second or third class citizens, but they are citizens of Israel, are Palestinian Muslims and Christians.
Well, I know. I mean, when I went there, when I went to interview Netanyahu for CNN back in 2012, I think it was, and I was completely stunned. We stopped at a cafe on the way back from, on the way to Jerusalem, in a cafe halfway from the airport. And I was with my Jewish producer, and I was looking around the cafe, and it was full of what seemed to me to be half Arabs and half Israelis. And I said, "Am I missing something here? What's happening here?" And he said, "Oh yeah, there's like a million Arab Israelis living in Israel. And I was really stunned. I don't know how many people watching this now know that, right?
Right.
In other words, it's clearly a pathway for the different groups to live in peace together. And it just begs the question, well, why can't it be achieved in Gaza, on the West Bank? Or in other words, why can't you extend what's happened in Jerusalem elsewhere?
Because there's too many, and that would ruin the 80-20 super-duper Jewish majority over the Palestinians. In fact, there's this study that was written by an advisor to Netanyahu. I'm sorry, his name has escaped me. It's back in 2004. It was published all about. They published all about it in the Jerusalem Post. Arnan something, like Milchan, the movie producer. Arnan. I'm sorry, I forget his last name. But the point was, and he was advising Sharon to do what was called the disengagement. Sometimes you hear pro-Israeli types say that this was the Palestinian state. They gave them Gaza. But what this guy is explaining is there's just too many Palestinians, and they keep making babies. So at the cost of withdrawing the Jewish settlers out of the Gaza Strip in 2005, what we'll do is we'll be figuratively kicking Gaza and the 2 million Palestinians there out of Israeli jurisdiction. That way, it won't be sort of this 50-50 split where it's really we get accused of having an apartheid state. Now we'll count 6 million Israelis versus only 3 million Palestinians on the West Bank. And so it won't look as bad as an apartheid. But then he says, but what do we expect the Palestinians in Gaza to do when we put them under this siege? Well, they're going to fight and resist. And then he says, we'll just have to kill and kill and kill. We'll have no other choice but to just, as they put it now, mow the grass. Just keep going back and kill them and kill them and kill them, because of course they won't accept being simply just locked in a concentration camp. But they had to do this because there's just too many of these people whose land they've conquered. But see, in 48, there was this massive ethnic cleansing. But in 67, when they took the Palestinian territories from Jordan and Egypt, they kept all the people, or almost all of them. So they have these huge territories with millions of people, almost an equivalent number of Palestinians as you have Israeli Jews, under the control of the Israeli government, as Netanyahu himself says, from the river to the sea. Okay. One nation, one security force for the whole area.
Now, Horton rightly points out that Israel's leadership has zero interest in making peace. The goal has always been to maintain Jewish dominance over Palestinians by any means necessary. That's why they withdrew settlers from Gaza in 2005, not to give Palestinians independence but to cut them off completely, turning Gaza into an open-air prison. And let's be clear, Israel's own advisors have admitted that their long-term strategy is to kill and kill and kill to keep Palestinian population under control. That's not self-defense. That's not about security either. That's a slow-motion genocide designed to maintain demographic dominance. Knowles is shocked that Palestinians keep resisting, but what do you expect? If you lock people in a cage, cut off their resources, bomb their homes, and tell them they'll never have rights, they're going to fight back. Any people would. The only way to end this cycle isn't by mowing the grass, it's by ending the occupation, recognizing Palestinian sovereignty, and finally holding Israel accountable for its decades of war crimes. But of course, MAGA conservatives like Knowles would rather pretend Israel is the victim while it carries out ethnic cleansing in plain sight. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.